Dr. James Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of the shuttle onto the alien soil of Lyria colony. The twin suns beat down on the research camp, making the Earth-standard protective suit uncomfortably warm. As Earth's leading xenoanthropologist, he had studied dozens of alien cultures, but this was different. The Lyrians were the newest species humanity had encountered, and everything about them was fascinating. "Welcome to Lyria colony, Dr. Carter," a melodious voice called out. A tall, slender figure approached him. Like all Lyrians, she had iridescent scales covering her body that shifted colors with her emotions. Right now, they shimmered with welcoming blues and greens. She wore what looked like a simple white robe, typical of Lyrian formal wear. "I am Kira, your cultural liaison," she said, her scales rippling with curious patterns. "We are most excited to begin this exchange program." James smiled, trying to remember everything he had learned about Lyrian customs. "Thank you for the welcome, Kira. I hope we can learn much from each other." He noticed other Lyrians watching from a distance, their scales showing patterns he couldn't yet interpret. Some wore robes like Kira's, while others displayed their natural scale patterns proudly. James made a mental note to study their clothing customs carefully. "Your temporary home is ready," Kira said, leading him toward a cluster of buildings. "We have tried to make it comfortable for human needs, though some aspects may be different from what you expect." She wasn't wrong. The living quarters looked like a cross between a greenhouse and a disco ball. The walls were covered in light-reactive crystals that changed colors, mimicking Lyrian communication patterns. "We communicate much through color," Kira explained, her own scales shifting to educational purple tones. "We hoped this would help you understand our ways better." James nodded, already taking notes on his tablet. "Fascinating. On Earth, we rely more on spoken words and facial expressions." "Yes, we have studied this," Kira replied. "Your species is very contained. You hide your emotions behind layers. Most interesting." As they talked, James noticed something odd. The Lyrians nearby seemed to be shedding their robes as the day grew warmer. Kira, seeing his confusion, quickly explained. "Ah, yes. Our scales regulate our body temperature. Coverings are mostly for formal occasions or extreme weather. We find human constant coverage quite puzzling." James smiled diplomatically. "Cultural differences are why I'm here, to help both our species understand each other better." "Indeed," Kira agreed, her scales showing patterns of approval. "Though I must warn you, there will be many surprises as we learn each other's ways." Looking at the alien landscape and the color-changing beings around him, James knew this would be his most challenging assignment yet, but that's exactly why he had come. Sometimes the biggest differences led to the most important discoveries. "I look forward to every surprise," he said honestly, and he meant it. The next few days kept James busy setting up his research camp. His temporary home was filled with scientific equipment, cultural reference materials, and data pads full of notes. Every new observation about the Lyrians fascinated him. "Your dwelling is very cluttered," Kira observed during her daily visit. Her scales shifted to curious orange patterns as she looked around. "Humans seem to need many objects." James laughed, organizing his research tablets. "We do tend to collect things. Each item has a purpose, though." He pointed to his equipment. "These help me understand your people better." Kira moved closer to examine his instruments, her scales rippling with interest. "And these coverings you wear," she gestured to his light research uniform. "They serve purpose too." "Yes," James explained patiently. "They protect us, keep us comfortable, and follow our cultural rules about modesty." "Modesty," Kira's scales flickered with puzzlement. "This concept is difficult for us. Our scales are our pride, our way of showing who we are. Hiding them seems strange." As they talked, James noticed more Lyrians gathering outside his dwelling. Many wore their ceremonial robes, but others displayed their natural scale patterns. Some scales showed excitement, others curiosity, and a few showed colors he hadn't learned to read yet. They are eager to meet you, Kira explained. You are the first human many have seen, but some of our customs may surprise you. James nodded, remembering his training. That's why I'm here, to learn and understand. Please, tell me about your greeting customs. Kira's scales shifted to teaching purple again. We have many ritual greetings. Each shows different levels of respect and friendship. The most formal involves displaying our scale patterns to show honest emotions. Like wearing your heart on your sleeve, James murmured. What is this sleeve heart? Kira asked, scales showing confusion. Just a human saying, James smiled. It means being open with your feelings. Ah. Kira's scales brightened with understanding. Yes, exactly. But humans hide their emotions under coverings. How do you know what others feel? We have other ways, James explained. Facial expressions, tone of voice, body language. Here, let me show you. He demonstrated different human expressions. Happy, sad, surprised. Kira watched with fascination, her scales shimmering with delight. So many subtle signals. We must learn these too, to understand humans better. As the twin suns began to set, casting purple shadows across the colony, James felt optimistic about his mission. Yes, there were huge differences between their species, but both sides wanted to learn and understand. Tomorrow, Kira said as she prepared to leave, we begin formal greeting rituals. Be prepared for new experiences. James nodded, already making notes. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it with an open mind and respect for Lyrian ways. Early morning brought a knock at James's door. He opened it to find Kira, her scales showing formal patterns he'd never seen before. She had removed her ceremonial robe, her iridescent scales glowing in the morning sunlight. I come to perform the ritual of true seeing, she announced proudly. Our highest greeting of friendship. James quickly stepped back, keeping his professional composure. Kira, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should consult the cultural guidelines first. Kira's scales flickered with confusion. But I study human customs. Your people say nothing to hide when forming trust. This ritual shows we hide nothing from each other. James had to stop himself from laughing at the literal translation error. Ah, I see the problem. That's just a saying. It means being honest with words, not quite what you're thinking. Kira's scales flushed with embarrassment, turning a deep purple. Oh my. She quickly retrieved her robe from where she'd left it. I have made a serious error in translation. It's okay, James assured her, maintaining a respectful distance. Cultural misunderstandings are exactly why we're here, to learn from each other. Once Kira was properly dressed again, they sat in James's study area. Her scales still showed embarrassment, but also curiosity. Please explain, she said. How do humans show complete trust and honesty? James thought carefully about his answer. We use words, actions, and time spent together. Trust builds slowly through sharing thoughts and experiences, not through physical display. Fascinating. Kira's scales shifted to their learning purple color. Among my people, displaying our scales is the most honest act. They show our true emotions, cannot lie. While humans, James explained, show truth through consistent words and actions. We build trust by being reliable and honest over time. Kira nodded, her scales now showing understanding. So when humans say, nothing to hide, they mean, we're being open with our thoughts and feelings, James finished, through words and actions. I must inform the other Lyrians, Kira said, standing up. We had all misunderstood this human phrase. Several were preparing for the ritual today. James tried not to imagine how many cultural incidents he'd just avoided. This is exactly why cultural exchange is so important. We learn from our misunderstandings. Before leaving, Kira turned back, her scales showing a mix of humor and embarrassment. Dr. Carter, thank you for handling this with such. What is your word? Professionalism. Thank you for being so open to learning, he replied diplomatically, even from mistakes. As she left, James started writing his daily report. This would make an excellent example of why careful cultural translation was so important, though perhaps he'd leave out some of the specific details. A week after the ritual misunderstanding, James sat with Kira in the colony's cultural center. The walls shimmered with changing colors as other Lyrians moved about, their scales displaying various emotional patterns. Today, we learn about human clothing customs, Kira said, her scales showing teaching purple. She had become much more comfortable since the incident, treating it as a valuable lesson in cultural differences. Yes, James replied, pulling out his tablet. And I'd like to learn more about how your scales communicate emotions. It's fascinating how they change with your feelings. Several young Lyrians gathered around, their scales flickering with curiosity. They wore light robes, having learned about human comfort zones. See how my scales shift, Kira demonstrated, letting her colors flow from purple to blue to green. Each pattern has meaning. This is joy. This is interest. This is thinking deeply. James recorded everything, asking questions. And humans must seem very hard to read to you, since our skin doesn't change color. A young Lyrian named Zax spoke up, his scales showing confusion. Yes, how do you know what others feel when they're covered in these clothes? James smiled and stood up. Let me show you. He demonstrated different human expressions and gestures. A smile means happiness. Crossed arms often mean discomfort or disagreement. Leaning forward shows interest. The Lyrians practiced these expressions, causing much laughter as they tried to smile with their alien faces. Their scales showed patterns of amusement and joy. And your clothes? Kira asked. They have meanings too. Yes, James explained. Different clothes for different situations. Formal wear for important meetings, comfortable clothes for relaxing, special clothes for ceremonies. Like our ceremonial robes. Zax's scales brightened with understanding. We wear them for important events. Exactly, James said. Though humans wear something all the time, not just for ceremonies. It's part of our culture. Kira's scales showed deep thought. So your coverings are like our scales. They send messages about who you are and what you're doing. That's a great comparison, James agreed. Though your scales are much more expressive than our clothes. The learning session continued through the afternoon. The Lyrians practiced reading human facial expressions while James learned to interpret more scale patterns. Both sides made mistakes, but now they laughed about them instead of being embarrassed. Understanding grows between our peoples, Kira said as the day ended. Her scales glowed with warm, friendly colors, even if we are very different. James nodded, packing up his notes. Sometimes the biggest differences lead to the best friendships. We just have to learn how to understand each other. As he walked back to his quarters, James saw several Lyrians practicing human smiles and waves. Meanwhile, he found himself paying more attention to their scale patterns, learning to read their emotional language. Step by step, two very different species were learning to communicate. 1 month into his stay, James found himself more comfortable reading Lyrian scale patterns than he'd ever expected. He sat in the colony's garden dome with Kira, sharing stories about their worlds while recording observations. Your Earth oceans fascinate me, Kira said, her scales shimmering with excitement. So much water in one place. Our world has only small seas. And your floating crystal forests are amazing, James replied, sketching them in his notebook. Trees that float in the air, changing colors with the seasons. They had developed an easy friendship based on mutual respect and curiosity. Other Lyrians often joined their discussions, eager to learn about Earth. Tell us more about human families, asked Zax, who had become a regular at their cultural exchanges. His scales showed eager curiosity. Do you really stay with the same mate for life? Many do, James explained, though not all. Humans have different types of families and relationships. Kira's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. Like how we have different clan structures. Some live in large groups, others in small family units. Exactly, James said. Both our species adapt to what works best for different situations. A group of Lyrian children ran past, playing a game that mixed human tag with traditional Lyrian color matching. Their scales flashed with joy and excitement. Look, Kira pointed, her scales showing pride. They combine both our cultures naturally. No confusion about customs anymore. James smiled, remembering the awkward first days. We've all learned so much. Your people now understand human privacy needs, and we've learned to read your emotional displays. Though some things still puzzle us, Zax admitted, his scales showing mild confusion. Like why humans wear coverings even when alone. And I still don't understand how your scale patterns can show multiple emotions at once. James laughed. But that's okay. We don't have to understand everything to respect each other. Kira's scales rippled with agreement. This is why the exchange program works. We learn, we make mistakes, we grow wiser. As the artificial sun began to set in the dome, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal trees, James realized how far they'd come. The initial misunderstandings and awkward moments had led to genuine friendship and understanding. Tomorrow, Kira said, her scales showing formal patterns, the council wants to discuss expanding the exchange program. More humans, more learning. Really? James sat up straighter. That's wonderful news. Yes, she agreed, her scales glowing warmly. You have shown us that different ways can work together. That understanding comes through patience and respect. Looking at his friends, their scales showing various shades of happiness and hope, James felt proud. This was why he had become a xenoanthropologist, to help different species understand each other, one cultural difference at a time. To understanding, he said, raising his water cup in a human toast. To understanding, the Lyrians echoed, their scales glowing like stars. The peaceful progress at the colony was interrupted when a delegation of Lyrian High Council members arrived unexpectedly. James watched from his office as their sleek ship landed, its crystal surfaces gleaming in the twin sunlight. Dr. Carter. Kira rushed in, her scales showing worry patterns he'd never seen before. We have a problem. The traditionalists on the council, they think humans are deceiving us. Deceiving you? How? James asked, already feeling concerned about the patterns of agitation he saw in Kira's scales. They say humans hide their true selves behind coverings, she explained quickly. That we cannot trust those who won't show their true colors like we do. The council members strode through the colony, their scales displaying formal and suspicious patterns. Unlike the local Lyrians, they wore elaborate ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded crystals. Senior anthropologist Carter, the lead council member, addressed him, scales showing authority patterns. I am council leader Vax. We have concerns about human customs. James bowed respectfully. I'm happy to address any concerns, council leader. Your people constantly hide themselves, Vax stated, his scales shifting to accusatory red. How can we trust those who conceal their true nature? Kira stepped forward, her scales showing determination. Council leader, you misunderstand. Let me explain. Silence. Vax's scales flashed with anger. You have been contaminated by human thinking. James raised his hand calmly. Council leader, may I demonstrate something? When Vax nodded stiffly, James pointed to the council members' robes. You wear ceremonial robes to show your authority and respect for tradition. Yes. Of course, Vax replied, scales showing pride. Humans wear different clothing for similar reasons, James explained. To show respect, to indicate our roles, to honor traditions. Just as your robes don't hide your scale patterns, our clothes don't hide our true selves. Several council members' scales showed thoughtful patterns. James continued. We express ourselves differently, but with the same honesty. Through words, actions, facial expressions. Kira joined in, her scales glowing with sincerity. Council leader, I've worked with Dr. Carter for months. Humans don't hide truth. They show it in their own way, just as we show it in ours. Young Zax stepped forward bravely. Watch. He demonstrated human expressions they'd learned. Smiling, frowning, nodding. They speak with their faces, their hands, their voices. Different, but still true. Vax's scales shifted slowly from suspicious red to uncertain purple. You say these coverings are like our ceremonial robes, a way of showing respect and position. Yes, James nodded. Different methods, same purpose, honest communication between our peoples. The council members huddled together, their scales showing various patterns of discussion. Finally, Vax turned back. Perhaps, he said, scales now showing cautious acceptance. We have been too quick to judge. We will need more discussion, but the exchange program may continue. James and Kira shared a relieved look. Another crisis avoided through understanding and patience. After the council's visit, James and Kira worked harder than ever to create clear guidelines for human-Lyrian interactions. They sat in the cultural center, surrounded by data pads and holographic displays showing both species' customs. Here's what I suggest, James said, pointing to his notes. We create a simple color guide for humans to understand basic Lyrian scale patterns, like a translation book. Kira's scales brightened with approval. Yes, and we can make a human expression guide for Lyrians. Smile means happy. Frown means sad. Exactly. James typed quickly on his tablet. And we should include clothing customs too. When to wear formal clothes, when casual is okay. Zax, who had become their unofficial assistant, brought them drinks. His scales showed excitement as he looked at their work. Can we add something about human personal space? That was a big lesson for us. Good thinking. Kira agreed, her scales showing teacher purple. And we'll explain why humans need private time, how they recharge by being alone sometimes. They worked through the day, creating simple rules that both species could understand. James drew pictures showing proper human greetings, while Kira recorded videos of common scale patterns and their meanings. Look at this, James said proudly, showing them a completed page. Basic rules for human-Lyrian friendship. Rule 1. Respect personal space, 2 arm lengths for humans, 1 length for Lyrians. Rule 2. Always ask before touching or approaching closely. Rule 3. Wear appropriate clothing/robes for formal meetings. Rule 4. Learn each other's emotional signals. Kira added her own notes about scale patterns. And here, a guide to human facial expressions and body language. See, we explain that humans smile with their mouths, not their scales. Other Lyrians gathered around, their scales showing interest as they studied the guides. Even some of the more traditional elders came to look, their scales gradually shifting from doubt to understanding. This will help prevent misunderstandings, Zax said, his scales glowing with hope. No more confusion about rituals or customs. James nodded, remembering their awkward first meetings. We've come so far from those early days. Now we understand each other better. And look, Kira pointed outside, where human visitors were talking with Lyrian families. The humans wore light protective suits adapted to show respect for Lyrian customs, while the Lyrians maintained comfortable distances. They're already using our guidelines, James said proudly, learning from our experiences. As they watched, a human child waved to a Lyrian child. The Lyrian child's scales flickered with joy as they waved back, copying the human gesture perfectly. That, Kira said, her scales showing deep satisfaction, is what we worked for. True understanding between our peoples. James smiled, adding one final note to their guide. Remember, different doesn't mean wrong. It just means we have more to learn from each other. 2 months after creating their cultural guidelines, James stood before a mixed audience of humans and Lyrians in the colony's main hall. The room sparkled with the light from hundreds of Lyrian scales, all showing patterns of excitement and anticipation. Today marks a special day, James began, wearing the formal Earth diplomatic uniform. The first graduation of our Cultural Understanding program. In the front row sat 20 humans and 20 Lyrians who had completed the new training course. They had spent weeks learning each other's customs, practicing proper greetings, and building friendships. Kira stepped forward, her scales glowing with pride. These students have learned to bridge the gap between our peoples. Watch and see. The graduates demonstrated what they had learned. Humans correctly interpreted complex scale patterns, while Lyrians showed perfect understanding of human facial expressions and gestures. They moved together in perfect harmony, respecting personal space while showing friendship. Remember our first days? Zax whispered to James, his scales showing amusement. All those misunderstandings about clothes and rituals. James smiled. Now look at us. Humans wearing modified suits that show respect for Lyrian customs. Lyrians understanding human privacy needs. A young human graduate named Sarah stepped up to speak. Before this program, I was nervous about Lyrian scale patterns. Now I can read basic emotions easily. I know when my Lyrian friends are happy, sad, or confused. Her Lyrian study partner, Mira, joined her. And I understand why humans smile, why they need time alone, why they wear different clothes for different occasions. We are different, but we understand each other now. The audience watched as each pair demonstrated their new skills. Humans correctly responded to Lyrian formal greetings, while Lyrians showed perfect understanding of human personal space and social customs. This is only the beginning, Kira announced, her scales showing bright, hopeful patterns. Next month, we start training diplomatic teams. Soon, human-Lyrian cooperation will spread to other colonies. James looked around the room with satisfaction. Human children played with Lyrian children, each copying the other's way of showing happiness. Adult humans and Lyrians discussed business deals, each respecting the other's customs. We've created something special here, he told Kira. Real understanding between our species. Yes, she agreed, her scales showing deep joy. Not just tolerating differences, but truly appreciating them. The ceremony ended with a celebration that mixed human and Lyrian traditions. There was human music, while Lyrian scales created beautiful light shows. Some humans had even learned to dance in ways that complemented Lyrian color displays. Dr. Carter called Council Leader Vax, who had returned to see the graduation. His scales showed approval. You have proven that different species can truly understand each other. Your methods will be used throughout Lyrian space. James smiled, watching the happy crowd. We just had to learn to see through each other's eyes, or scales. 1 year after James first landed on Lyria Colony, he stood in the grand meeting hall of the Earth Embassy, a brand new building that combined human and Lyrian architecture. Crystal walls changed colors in harmony with the Lyrians present, while maintaining the privacy humans needed. Who would have thought, Kira said beside him, her scales showing happy patterns, that one small misunderstanding would lead to all this? James laughed. You mean when you thought humans showed trust by? Yes, yes, Kira interrupted, her scales flickering with embarrassment and humor. Let's not remind everyone of that particular cultural lesson. They watched as human and Lyrian officials sign new trade agreements. Thanks to their cultural exchange program, such meetings now ran smoothly. Humans wore specially designed formal wear that respected both cultures, while Lyrians understood human handshakes and business customs. Look at Zax, James pointed to their young friend, who now worked as a cultural advisor. He was teaching a group of human children how to read basic scale patterns, while human teachers showed Lyrian children Earth games. He has come far, Kira agreed. We all have. Remember how scared everyone was of making mistakes at first. Now, humans and Lyrians moved comfortably around each other. In the colony's markets, they traded goods and stories. In research labs, they worked side by side, combining their different ways of thinking to solve problems. Dr. Carter called Sarah, one of their first graduates. The new training center is ready. We have 50 more students starting next week. James nodded proudly. The Cultural Understanding Program had grown bigger than he'd ever imagined. Other alien species had heard about its success and wanted to join. Earth's government is very pleased. A human diplomat told them. They want to use your program as a model for all first contact situations. Kira's scales showed proud patterns. The Lyrian Council says the same. They call it the Carter-Kira method now. James felt embarrassed by the praise. We just helped everyone understand each other better. Showed them that different isn't wrong. Much more than that, Kira said, her scales glowing warmly. We proved that friendship can cross any boundary. That understanding comes from respect and patience. As the day ended, James watched the twin suns set through the crystal walls. Human children waved goodbye to their Lyrian friends, who responded with happy scale patterns. Adult humans and Lyrians made plans for dinner together, each comfortable with the other's customs. So, Kira asked, "Will you stay? Help us expand the program?" James smiled at his friend. "Of course, we still have so much to learn from each other, and so much to teach others," she agreed, her scales showing friendship patterns he'd come to know well. Together, they walked out into the colony's evening, where humans and Lyrians lived and worked in harmony. Their story had become more than just a cultural exchange. It was proof that understanding could bridge any difference, no matter how great.